Hey everybody, I hope you're having a good day. I want to welcome a special guest, Matt Phillips. Matt's been writing for Runners Connect for a long time and just recently wrote a really cool article about the IT ban. So Matt from the UK, or from London maybe I should say, welcome.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me along. It's a pleasure.
So Matt, you are, just so I can kind of bring our audience up to speed if they're new to Runners Connect, because you've written for a while. So you're a sports therapist and a running coach, is that correct?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Um, So you did an article, and actually, there's some things I have to admit that some myths that I fell victim to, having a run shop for 12 years and different things. So I thought I knew it all, and apparently there's a couple myths that I fell to. So I want to bring you on board and talk about some of these things a little bit. But tell us a little bit about, if you would, as far as, so you wrote about IT band and stretches, and one of the things I found most interesting is how strong you say the IT band is, and then it's really difficult to stretch. If you could elaborate, that'd be great.
Yeah, a few years ago, I used the word myth a lot, and now I regret it a little bit because sometimes it's used a lot too much these days, and as we evolve, it can put people's feathers up. It's not, I try not to use myth now in my presentations. I just try and let people know that the more research that's done, the more we realise that previous ideas we had are less likely to be true. It's not that we've got all the answers. Okay, one of the things about ITB syndrome is it is called a syndrome because that sounds a little bit better when we're talking to patients than ITB. I'm not sure what causes it. Okay, sounds a bit more technical. But whenever you see the word syndrome, it means science hasn't really come up with an exact answer of what causes it. You see my point? So the thing about ITB syndrome is it is the ITB, the iliotibial band, is a hugely strong structure, and it has to be to do its job. The fact it's called an IT band allows us to realise that it's not an IT muscle. Okay, it's a band, and it's made up of a similar structure to tendons and ligaments. It's kind of a cross between the tendon and the ligament because it links it's iliotibial, so the ilium, the top of the hip, and it goes all the way down the side of the leg to the lateral tibia, hence iliotibial. And it's very, very, very strong. And there's some fantastic mechanical stress investigations that have gone into it, which show exactly how strong it is. And one that we quote, which kind of makes people realize what we mean by strong, is tests have shown, there was a study by Chowdhury which showed that the amount of newtons that would cause just 1% change in the shape of the IT band, for example, it comes to about 9,000, overnight, it was something like 9,017 newtons, which may not mean a lot to anybody, but that is kind of, I'll give you an idea, a lion's jaw creates just over 4,000 newtons. So if a lion got hold of your ITB, God forbid, it still wouldn't get through it. Your ITB would be fine. The rest of you would be mauled to bits. But your ITB would still be there hanging off your hip bone and all the way down to your tibia.
Well, that's comforting.
A crocodile's jaw, okay, then you're in trouble. Your ITB would have it with a crocodile because that reduces about 16,000. But as far as like manual therapy, okay, even the strongest form of manual therapy with one person holding one end and one holding the other and using whatever elbows and other adjustments they've got, at the most would produce about 450. So when it comes to the idea of either a therapist or a particular stretch position actually making a difference to that band, thankfully it doesn't, because the ITB band is there to transmit the huge forces involved in locomotion, and that's its job, and it's probably a good thing that it is actually stronger than steel cable, because that's what it's there to do.
So you actually say, so as far as from a recovery standpoint, or maybe preventative, that strengthening the abductors, but also the step width are kind of the things that you kind of feel are good ways to kind of focus on an injury versus stretching and things like that. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, well, in the studies, which need to be more, but in the studies we do have looking into what potentially could cause ITB syndrome, on the one hand, studies have showed that typical traditional ITB stretches, they don't either make a difference to the length and they don't, it's very difficult to show what reduces injury risks. There's so many other factors, but nothing's actually positively come up as, oh wow, these have actually stretched. But on the other side of the coin, there is, like you say, some research which has showed that in distance runners suffering from ITB syndrome, some research shows weakness of the hip abductors, so the muscles on the side of the hip, like the gluteus medius and minimus in particular, and a bit of the gluteus maximus. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's kind of the weak hip abductors cause the ITB syndrome, but it gives us a useful tool and a more evidence-based tool to play around with, well, what happens if we try and strengthen these abductors, will that actually help the symptoms? And some of the research, not all of it, there's always going to be contradictions, but some of them is quite useful in that it shows that if we strengthen it, then it can cause relief in some runners.
So the other thing, so step width, that sounds to me like that could be something that could be not a quick remedy. There's no quick remedies really, quick fixes, but you're essentially talking about keeping your feet a little bit further apart. So like if I run in this, so I live up in Denver, snows, I look back and I'll see like a center line that my feet kind of go over. Is that what you're talking step width, and maybe trying to keep them a little bit space between them?
Exactly, yeah. So some of the research, it was a Meerden study in 2012, showed that if you actually increase step width just by about, we're only talking 2 or 3 centimeters, then it can reduce the strain on the ITB by up to about 20%. Okay, so this gives us a wonderful thing to play around with when we have got runners. Exactly as you said, part of the recovery process we now know with a more kind of pain-centered way of handling runners is if we can help them run in a pain-free way by making a slight modification to how they run, then that could set a whole kind of chip off where the brain and nervous system starts experiencing pain-free running, so certain neurotags and connections associated with pain output are reduced and desensitized, and that can then help the ball rolling. What we do find, because I do a lot of gait analysis in clinic, and we find that whilst the runner adopts those widening drills, great, they're pain-free, but then they may well go back to their original way of running and the pain's not there anymore. So it's not necessarily that you have to run wide to avoid ITB syndrome, but it's a great tool we've got to try and get you through it with the other rehab, with the strengthening, because you're going to need stronger abductors to maintain that step width. It's a great tool we've got for gait re-education to get you through the pain problem.
So say someone's training for marathons, common ITBN kicks in towards, as you're approaching taper, and then you're like, oh my God, what do I do? If somebody, say I'm in that position, I come and I see you in your practice, is that one short-term thing that I can do to kind of get myself to the finish line, is actually try to make a mental note of my step width? I've run about 50,000 miles and I've never thought of step width, so maybe it's a really hard thing to make an adjustment.
Like any kind of gait retraining, the evidence we've got kind of shows that it's going to take, we're talking about changing habits, so it's probably going to take at least 6 weeks before, if it does happen, it's like cadence training. Cadence training is used a lot, okay, but we're trying to change habit, and that means we've got to move it from this whole unconscious incompetence all the way through the cycle until your system is actually outputting it without you thinking about it. And for that process to happen, it's got to be little drop by drop, so eventually it moves from conscious effort into unconscious. So if someone comes just before a race, or even within 4 weeks or something, and they're looking for ways to actually do the race without being in pain, it may well be a strategy. But then with pain's very complex, and if you're in a race and you're hurting, changing any form of sensory input is potentially going to help you. So it might not be just the width. It's going to help. When, imagine you're in a race and even you're tired or you're hurting, and then suddenly, I don't know, maybe you have a great thought, or maybe you see the finish line and the pain disappears and you actually start sprinting. And what the hell's all that about? Okay, it's not that, suddenly there's this reserve tank which we've managed to switch on, and that reserve tank is the brain's now seeing the finish line, and it's not so worried anymore. So pain goes down, it opens up the reserve tank, and off you go. But you can do that throughout any rate. To a certain extent, you can do that by remaining positive, by not worrying about something, and just changing the way you run. Sometimes I get people to slow down. Sometimes a good one with ITB is actually speed up a little bit. Go over your race pace. Just change that sensory input. Don't do it all the way to the finish line because you won't get there. But just for a little while, and the brain might go, oh, fine, okay, we're not getting the same input. Fine, I'll relax for a while.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I wish I could remember the quote. Maybe you can remember it. I think you've said it twice in 2 different posts now about pain and it's your body's way. You said it very elegant. It's your body's way of something, and does that ring a bell whatsoever?
If it was elegant, I must have been quoting someone else. But no, pain it's some of the great quotes that have come out from people like Mosley and before is pain is a sign of defense and not defect. So it's actually your ally. Okay, it's actually looking after you. And I think in running, especially in competitive running, we confuse effort with pain. And this whole break through the pain, ignore the pain, beat the pain, pain is just weakness leaving the body, has led people to confuse the difference between, okay, psychologically prepare yourself, run through, you can do this, you're not going to give up, that voice which nags us, there's no point doing this, that's different. Okay. When your body starts outputting pain, then you can't just ignore it. It's your body saying, I'm not happy with what you're doing at the moment. If you keep doing that, I'm going to look after you, okay? Because that's what I do. I'm the brain and nervous system, and you're my number one priority.
Actually, that was it. So, and it was
cool.
stated. Better than nothing. One other question that I actually wanted to touch on, because this one I really felt, so scar tissue, okay? And I always kind of say scar tissue, Achilles tendonitis. This is how I would talk to customers when I had my shop. So you get a little tear in your Achilles tendon, body grows some scar tissue over it. Scar tissue is less flexible. Over time, you lose flexibility. But would you disagree with that?
Again, it's a case of, it's one of these beliefs which has emerged because it's quite structurally based, okay? And that historically we look at the body as kind of a bit like a car where it's got these structures and they wear down, or, you have a quick bodge job and it's not quite right. And scar tissue is one of these things that we assume becomes a problem once you've injured yourself. There's no actual evidence, one, of scar tissue actually being there. Two, that if it is there, it's actually causing a problem. And three, putting that stuff aside, we automatically assume that by pushing into it, that we can kind of break it down. And this is rather similar to, the Chowdhury study with ITB. I normally say to patients, you realise, have a talk to a surgeon. A surgeon uses something called a scalpel to get through scar tissue because they need it. You say to a surgeon that, oh yeah, my massage therapist broke it down with their elbow. They go, well, what are you talking about? Scar tissue is much, 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 much stronger than anything a physical therapist can even hope will get close to breaking down. Thankfully, because again, it's there for a reason. Okay. So, although there is some research which suggests that some form of cross-friction therapy, there's lots of schools based on that. You go to a therapist and they will it's quite painful therapy, but they'll rub across a tendon or something, and there's this idea, this mechanotransduction thing where the pressure will stimulate cell production and stuff. It's a very dodgy, kind of flaky area which hasn't got an awful lot of evidence for it. And again, looking at pain science, we know that if you do any form of treatment which generates pain, whether it's deep tissue massage, which is too deep, or cross-friction therapy, by making your patient suffer pain, you could be increasing sensitivity, you could be creating neurotags which are going to delay recovery. So generally, there's quite a large school of people who will now say any therapy that creates pain is nocivic in nature, and it could well do more worse than good.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm going to put a link to your site. I'm going to say it here, but I'll put a link. It's sportinjurymatt, 2 T's, matt.co.uk. Can you tell us a little bit just about your kind of practice, or I guess do you work with people virtual, can you, as well as people that are in your area? Just tell us a little bit about your practice, if you would.
Yeah, I started off in strength and conditioning about kind of 2000, so I'm as old as I look, and that started off again quite structurally based. Like if something is tight, we'll stretch it. If something is weak, we'll strengthen it, and that was kind of the basis. And then the whole myofascial thing came out, and foam rolling took over, and balance training. So one of the good things of being old is you see a lot of kind of things come and go, and you have to evolve with it, as I'm sure you have as well. So I've evolved with the times and got more into the kind of pain science side of things, like the therapists I kind of hang out with in social media. And we kind of realize now that a lot of helping people in pain is actually education. We've moved very much as therapists from what one great paper labels as operators, where patients come in. And the whole idea of calling someone a patient is kind of played down a little bit now, because as soon as you say someone's a patient, right, come in, lie down on the couch, I'll fix you. I'm going to do this manipulation, I'm going to do this massage. And we realize that's not really the case now, because the human body isn't like a car. You can't just tighten it here, loosen it here, because we've got this thing called a brain and a nervous system. So a lot of dealing with pain is about education. So once upon a time, I didn't like online stuff so much. I thought, no, I've got to get the person in clinic. I've got to do face-to-face. So I still need to do face-to-face for, a good assessment. I still got to check with a structures are kind of feeling a bit kind of different than normal. But ultimately, there's an awful lot we can do online now because there is education. Sometimes dispelling myths, telling somebody that because they had an injury when they were 16 years old, that's not the reason their knee is still hurting, or probably not the reason their knee's hurting now 15 years later. Telling them that the body heals. It's a fantastic healer. It's an amazing system. We're wonderfully strong and plastic. So if you're hurting now, don't worry about that thing 14 years ago. And actually, my advice would be probably to ignore the person who tells you it is because of that thing you had 14 years ago, because it's too easy to cash in on that. Okay, we need you to believe in yourself. We need you to look at your training. We need you to realize that 90 or 70 or 80% of running injuries are because of inappropriate training. So this is where the coaching comes into it. This is where I personally enjoy having the coaching experience as well as the therapy, because a lot of my therapy is seeing what they're doing. Are they overtraining? Their nutrition, their sleep, their recovery. And a very small fraction of my training of my therapy is actually lying them down on the couch and giving them a rub. It's still there, because massage can have some great uses, but it's much less than we once thought it was.
That's excellent. That's why I really enjoy working with you, and I love reading your posts and learning more, because I've helped people with injuries probably for 15 plus years as a coach. I own my shop, got to know a lot of people in different professions like yours and stuff, and it's that practical approach which I think is so critical. So I give a shout out to everyone listening to really check out Matt's services and stuff. So Matt, thank you so much for coming on. If anybody thinks Matt's old, he's not. And if he looks tired, it's because I think he has a somewhat newborn. Congratulations on that.
I'm free at the moment. They're not here. But yeah.
So
Do I look tired then?
We should probably end this before we get called to daycare or something. So Matt, thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day. And we look forward to learning more from you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for inviting me.